Okay.
In 1958, I asked my boss at the Harris Bank if I could attend a seminar put on by the Financial Analyst Society at Beloit College. It was a one-week affair, started on Sunday and ended at Saturday noon. I told my boss at the Harris Bank that I would pay my own way, and he said, "Oh, that won't be necessary. The bank will be glad to pick it up." "Sure, it's a good idea. You go." I said, and when I got up there on a Sunday afternoon, I was assigned a room in the dormitory when I registered and checked in. I soon found right straight across the room was a young man 16 years younger than I, named Warren Buffett. My roommate was a guy named Young from St. Louis, but I don't remember his first name, and I don't remember who Warren's roommate was. We all had a roommate. But it seemed like every time I came out the door to go to the cafeteria or a class or things, it seemed to kind of coincide with when Warren came out. So we would walk over to the cafeteria and have breakfast, go to the meeting room where the meetings were held, and I wanted to sit down in the front of the thing so I could be sure and not miss anything. Well, Warren happened to want to sit down front too, but we could not get seats together. We weren't that good enough friends at that time to try very hard to get seats together anyway. But I sat down in the front, sort of near the center, and he sat over to the right, and we sat there for the whole week, for all the sessions. And at when we get a 15-minute break or something to go outside, well, somehow Warren and I would go. We didn't know anybody else there, so we would kind of go out and talk. And one thing, and we discovered that we both liked milkshakes. He found out where the milkshake place was down over the hill, off the campus. And every night at 9:30 or so, when all the sessions were ended, he and I would go down over the hill to that milkshake place and have a milkshake. Sometimes a third person would join us, but Warren and I were the ones that did this all the time. And we had I look back now, and the one thing that we had in common to talk about was something about Washington, D.C. He said that he sort of grew up in Washington, D.C. when he was a teenager. His father was a congressman. And I said, "Where did you live in Washington, D.C.?" And he said, "Well, we lived in the Kennedy Warrens' apartment." Well, I knew that the Kennedy Warrens' apartment was, during those war years, the #1 favorite place to live in Washington, D.C. That was the top of the line. I had a good friend from Beloit College named Alan Stevens, and Alan told me that his parents lived in Washington, D.C., and that they lived at the Kennedy Warrens' apartment. Alan's father sold tractors to the government. He worked for a company called Cleveland Cleft Crawler Tractors. I don't know whatever happened to the company, but I guess it sounds like it was a competitor of Caterpillar. But anyway, Mr. Stevens was living pretty high on the hog, selling Caterpillar-type tractors to all parts of the government. Well, they invited me out to Sunday lunch. I was a third-class petty officer at the time, wore the sort of Donald Duck type of uniform. And I went out and we went down to the great dining room in the Kennedy Warrens and had our Sunday lunch. And I thought that was really the ultimate. Well, Warren said that that's where that they took an awful lot of their meals when he lived there. That he had the paper route twice a day in the Kennedy Warrens' apartment. He said in the morning he would get up and go down and deliver the Washington Post to all the subscribers in that big apartment building. And then he would come home from school in the afternoon and deliver the Washington Star. Here he was delivering 2 paper routes without ever going outside. He didn't have to bother with the bad weather and things that other paper boys had to worry about. He told me that he made $5,000 delivering papers. I thought he meant $5,000 a year, and I simply could not believe that anybody could make $5,000. So I didn't believe him. I thought he was stretching it a bit. I still don't know whether he was talking about $5,000 a year or $5,000 during his whole high school period when he did this, because most people back then grown people didn't make $5,000 a year. Anybody that had a salary that paid $5,000 a year was really upper crust people. But that's the kind of things that we enjoyed talking about back then. There is one unusual thing about the Kennedy Warrens' apartment. It was out on Connecticut Avenue near the Washington Zoo. And if you go out Connecticut Avenue past the zoo and over the top of a hill, here's this big, beautiful apartment building stretched out ahead of you. But they had one big problem. The zoo attracted buzzards, and the buzzards roosted on the top of the Kennedy Warrens' apartment building. And that, to me, that was a most unusual sight to see that. But this is the sort of thing that Warren and I talked about and visited about and sort of had in common back there. I do remember one night I lectured Warren about how he was not making best use of his contacts there. I was there to do a lot of networking myself. I wanted to get acquainted with as many people as I could around and have them remember who Fred Young was, because I may want to be changing jobs somewhere. So I was registered on the list that they passed out to all members registered there. I was listed as Fred J. Young, Assistant Cashier, Harris Trust and Savings Bank, Chicago, Illinois. He was listed as Warren Buffett, Omaha, Nebraska. So I told Warren that this is very bad public relations for him, that he should register himself as Warren Buffett Associates, so-and-so, Omaha, Nebraska. And I said, you got a wife, haven't you? You could make your wife and kids your associates. Well, why should I do that? I says, well, most of the people here, I think, they believe you're unemployed. Maybe look. And he says, well, what do I care what they believe? I don't care what they believe. And I thought that was most unusual for a young man in his 20s with, in this business, not being seemingly interested in making a name for himself somewhere. Everybody else was what you'd call networking today. Everybody else was trying to work everybody else for something, but not Warren Buffett. So that was my introduction to Warren Buffett in 1958. I told a number of my associates at the Harris Bank how I knew this guy long before he became popular and long before he was known at all. I went in one day and one of the guys says, Fred, we were talking about you and Warren Buffett the other day here, and one thing we can't figure out, since you knew Warren Buffett way back then, how come you never invested money with him? And I says, well, I didn't invest money with him at that time because I thought I knew more than he did. And they thought that was funny. But Warren obviously turned out so far better than I had. But there wasn't anything unusual about Warren Buffett at that seminar in 1958. He was a very quiet, very modest. Actually, he was one of the younger guys there. He was, I would say, in his 20s. I was in my 40s. And I was among the younger people there because most of it was old, people 50 or years old or more, successful investment people coming to upgrade their standing like that. So that's, I've always been a great admirer of Warren Buffett ever since then. Is that enough?